Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Conversations with Educators. I'm really excited to be here with you all today with my colleague, Lisa Tunnell. We will be discussing preparing your students for the workplace. And without further ado, I'm just going to kind of hop into the agenda and we can talk about what we will discuss and get a little bit better introduction of our guest speaker for today. So with me here, as I mentioned, is Lisa Tunnell, and we will be discussing, does your CTE curriculum align to the demands of today's workplace? And then after Lisa kind of addresses this guiding question, we'll definitely open up for live Q&A with all of you on today so that you can get all of your questions answered. And so, as I mentioned, Lisa is a former CTE director and health sciences educator. And when I think about my colleagues here at EAI, we're all former educators. And something we kind of laugh about in a great way is that we all have our different passions from what kind of area we were when we were in the classroom and when we were in the school districts. And so I just want you all to know how passionate Lisa is about CTE, and you could not be getting information from a more qualified person. And she has great ideas and always with the kids in mind. So I'm excited to have her here today. We work together as customer success, and she's also working now as a product manager. And so I'm just really happy to have her with us today.
Well, Jenna, thank you. And you stole my thunder a little bit when you were saying, how excited I am about CTE, but that's honestly one of my favorite things to talk about. And so with 30 minutes for our webinar today, I will do my best to keep to that time frame. We know with career and technical education, there is a lot to unpack there. And so when we talk specifically about using CTE curriculum to prepare our students for today's workforce, even that preparation, that's an animal, that's a large beast to prepare for. And so when we think about that, some things that are important to keep in mind is that CTE in general really prepares our kids for the future. And it doesn't matter what those kids are going to do when they leave our high schools, our schools in general. CTE, whether they're going to be involved with just a course or a full program of study, those kids get a lot of life skills out of those things. And so it's important to know that no matter what programs of study you're offering, no matter what courses you're offering, those courses and programs of study are really offering really valuable resources for those kids. Something that I like to laugh about with my CTE colleagues is that I know of a lot of kids that graduate from programs of study. Those kids are making more just out of high school than sometimes my annual salary as an educator. And a lot of times they didn't have any student debt to incur. So not only is it a financially valuable option for a lot of kids, they get really excited about those courses. And so we know, a lot of times as educators that there's particular reasons kids come to school. And for a large portion of kids, CTE classes fill that need. So they get really excited about health sciences and their anatomy courses, or getting to come to welding courses or automotive or engineering. Like they get really passionate about those things. And so CTE provides value in a lot of different ways. And so as we think about those things, when we think about the curriculum and aligning for the workforce, it's really important to keep those fresh in our mind, so we can attach value to those in kind of a couple different ways. So to segue into the first part of kind of what I'd like to talk about is, it is crucial to keep in mind the state requirements for curriculum. And so those always serve as a great kind of base. What are your requirements? And then you can grow from there. What courses are required in a program of study? Do you have those requirements? Are there certifications that must be offered within a program of study? And then do you have any work-based learning requirements or suggestions? So that's a good place to start to make sure that you're aligning. And then from there, you always want to consider what other suggestions and influences should you consider when growing your programs of study. And so I'm from Texas, and in Texas, we call those groups CTE advisory groups or CTE advisory councils. And those councils typically consist of your CTE teachers, administrators, we have parents and students, as well as community members, and then local stakeholders. So we have a wide variety of inputs on those groups, and they typically meet twice a year so that they can review your local workforce data, what programs of study and courses are being offered, and then what certifications, industry-based certifications are included in those programs of study. And that's important because we know that in every particular community, your CTE needs are going to be different. You know, in some areas, maritime may be a high need, and in others, you know, there may be a higher need for automotive or welding or engineering. So your particular area is going to have higher needs in certain areas than others. And it's going to be important to know those when you're offering those programs of study so that your students have a higher success rate when they're looking for jobs or internships or accessibility within the community to exercise their skills. So those, I would say, those advisory councils are really, really important when you're considering aligning your curriculum. They're really great sources of input as well as resources when you start to look for things along the lines of internships and workforce, like work-based learning, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But some other things to consider when you're building a curriculum or looking at your curriculum would be things like teacher certifications. Is it really hard to get specific teacher certifications? Are your current teachers certified correctly for the programs of study that you're offering? Do you have teachers that are highly qualified in certain areas that you can move around? Can you offer professional development in areas where you might be weak? Can you offer scaffolded certifications within a certain program of study that leads to like an industry-based certification that can help those kids prepare better, make them more valuable and viable in the workplace? And then something that may be a hot topic, but garnering student interest. And what does that look like for you? Does it start really early? Do you have any viable methods to do that, like interest inventories? Are you sending your programs of study out into the community? Are you sending them to your young students and teaching them about what you're offering? Things along those lines. And then how much are you relying on student interest to build your programs of study? Is that the only indicator? And if so, you maybe want to look at that and consider some other sources like your workforce data and your advisory councils. So I know that's a lot, but that's a good place to start as far as state requirements, and then really getting a well-rounded kind of bit of info to get off the ground.
That's great, Lisa. I think it really helps kind of really focus back to that guiding question of, does your CTE curriculum align with the demands of your workforce? You're talking about your state and your community. So once a district kind of identifies what they're going to do in terms of aligning to the state and, meeting the needs of their community, and it's time to build the curriculum, right? And get resources and things of that nature. How might you go about vetting a CTE curriculum?
Sure. And that really dovetails really well with what we were just talking about. So there's a lot of ways to go about this. And I will say first and foremost that there are a lot of really expensive CTE curriculums out there. So there's a spectrum, where you can start with, and we'll start with like the inexpensive way to do this, right? You can build your own CTE curriculum, and if that's the case, that's something that you need to do or you want to do. And even if you're going to purchase something expensive, it's really important that you are going to base your curriculum on your standards, whether you're using a state framework or a national framework. But you want those standards to be covered so that by the time your students are done covering that curriculum, you've hit upon all the standards that you were expected to or that you plan to. So I would say that's number one. When you're vetting a curriculum, make sure it's covering the standards that you expected it to. And then secondly, CTE, we know, is preparing students to incorporate knowledge and skills. And so if that's something, especially in the CTE arena that's needed, and you don't have an additional resource to cover, let's say, the skills portion of your course or your program of study, make sure that that's something that's in your vetting process, that you have both of those knowledge and skills pieces in that curriculum. And along with that, there's formative assessments to go with it. So if you're, let's say, in the health sciences arena and you needed to teach, medical assisting or CPR and first aid, you're not only testing those students' knowledge, but also you have a scaffolded framework for assessing their skills. So that by the time they leave you, they don't just have, head knowledge, but they also have the ability to demonstrate their skills within that framework. And then I would also say you want to be able to fill in the gaps. We know that not every curriculum framework is going to be perfect. Not every curriculum source is going to be perfect. So as you vet these sources and you see where the gaps are, you want to be able to fill those in. Let's say that they had a gap within the skills portion. You want to be able to identify those gaps and fill them, hopefully inexpensively, but also efficiently. And so that's important to be able to provide those resources for your students and then be able to assess them so that by the time they leave you, they can perform, the knowledge and skills necessary to pass their industry-based certifications, to walk into, a real life situation and be able to perform as expected.
That's great. So when we're looking at getting resources together and a curriculum together, I think you gave some great pieces of knowledge. And then to kind of tie it back to what you kind of started with, achieving what a community needs, how do you go about integrating, community resources or garnering that type of partnership into your program?
Perfect. So this is one of my favorite things, actually, and this is something that students get really excited about and your community gets really excited about, is when we get to tie in, the hands-on learning. This is where kids get to see their learning matters, right? Like we go to school for a little while, but what's it for? It's really essentially for the rest of your life. So we have the unique opportunity in CTE to make that come to life every day. And this can start early, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but we have the ability to bring in these community resources from everywhere. It can be parents, it can be the shop down the street, anybody. They can come into your classroom, you can go to them, it can be right outside the door, whatever it might be. But tied to real life, kids can see that what they're learning in the classroom, these skills and pieces of knowledge, are truly transferable to where scaffolded, through high school, through college, potentially, this leads to a real job. These things that they're learning in the classroom is actually what this person is doing in real life every day and is earning them a wage. And so if they have the ability to make that connection as often as possible, they have the ability to see that it's not something that's just this abstract concept, but it does truly lead to a career path for them. And they get more excited about it when it's something they're interested in. And so if we have the ability to show them this regularly and they can experience it regularly, especially with people that they know within their community. So it's their friend's father or a cousin's relation, or the person that they interact with at the flower shop or whatever, they can start to make those connections for themselves. They can see people within their own communities that are living these lives, and then they can start to see themselves in those places. And it's even more powerful when it can be like non-traditional work settings. So women and people that are potentially not supposed to be in certain roles, it makes it to where anybody can achieve anything, which is one of my most favorite things about CTE, is that we don't get put in boxes. And so I feel like that's one of a very powerful part of CTE. It allows kind of everybody to get involved, and kind of let kids find the opportunities available to them.
Almost sounds like you're talking about having equity for everyone.
You're exactly right, Jenna.
And kind of in that same vein, I know when I was in the school district and working with electives, it was really important to get kids started in those prior to high school so that they had kind of a knowledge of it and an interest in it. So what are your thoughts, and what have you seen work in terms of kind of starting the kids early with CTE?
Yeah, perfect. So I actually have a graphic that I'll drop into the chat as we close. It's from TEA from Texas, and it shows kind of like the continuum of work-based learning and how it really isn't something that just starts in middle school and high school, but really it starts with like this awareness of work and those like career fairs and things like that. And so the first little chunk happens like in this elementary age, like pre-K through elementary, and they call it learning of work. And so these are things like industry and career awareness, where you have, like career day at school, and you can have anybody maybe come and talk about their job, parents come in or whatever, career fairs, things along those lines. And it's really awesome when you have, again, like it doesn't have to be your traditional careers. You expose them to just about any career that you possibly could in these type of age groups. So really just this learning of work. It's a thing, people work. Then a little bit older, when we get into the middle school level, they have the category of learning about work. So this is where you have industry and career exploration. It might be just a little bit more structured. You can offer courses, but this is where students might start to take those interest inventories, where they find out what their interests might lie in. Like they might be interested in specific categories related to work, what college majors might interest them, things along those lines. So they kind of have an idea about where they might lie on that spectrum of work. And so they're just doing a little exploring all around. They also might learn about what programs of study are offered for them at their high school if they were to stay in that same district. So they're learning a little bit more kind of specific information. Then at the high school level, they mention that they're learning for work. So here we do some more specific career preparation. And this is where they get into those programs of study. They take a sequence of courses typically. And that sequence of courses should typically get more rigorous. And so it's going to lead them toward a lot of times certifications. A lot of times it will have work-based learning integrated into it. They might go out into their community and actually do some work experience where they get some job shadowing experiences, things along those lines. So they're really preparing like what it might be like to experience work in some of these areas. And then the last little chunk here is post-secondary. And this is where they're learning through work. So they may actually have like job shadowing, or paid internships, things along those lines, where they're doing career training. And so they may be earning a wage in some cases through here. And this is all learning experiences, but it's also important to note that they might find something that they don't like. So in all of these categories, they might get into like an internship or an externship or a program of study that they don't like. And that is important to find out, because if you get into, I'll use health sciences again, and find out I hate like the sight of blood. I can't handle it. You got to get out of there before you go through 7 years of medical school.
Yes.
So all of these things are very important and good stepping stones for the CTE preparation. So I really like that graphic. I'll share it for everybody, but I do think that's very helpful in preparation for a career.
That's great. This is why I wanted to talk to you about this, because you have such great insight on it and just an excitement about the whole subject, and makes me want to do it. So I want to now just see if there's any kind of final words you have for us. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And then we definitely will open it up to any questions from our audience.
Awesome. So yeah, as we finish, I do have just a few closing thoughts. So as a few checks, like how do you know your CTE curriculum is aligned? What might you want to check? You can always check to see if your programs of study are aligned with your local workforce. That's a huge indicator. Like, what is your local workforce putting out that they need? Do they need electrical engineers? Do they need welders? Do they need EKG technicians? That data is readily available. It should be published multiple times a year. And so you should be able to check that and see, are your programs of study aligned with what your local workforce needs? It is important to note that student interest and local workforce needs may not always be aligned. And that's something that's hard to reconcile sometimes, but it is important to know that if your student interest is high in one area and low workforce needs, they're not going to be able to find a job in that area. So if you're pumping out a bunch of a certain type of career and nobody is hiring there, that doesn't help them. So that's a hard conversation to have, but necessary, because we can't be preparing students for an area where there are no jobs. That doesn't help anybody. So that's important to note. Also, are you offering certifications that are aligned to your program of study and useful? So most states publish a listing of certifications that are aligned with your program of study and recognized by industry. So that's important to have aligned. You don't want to be offering a certification that isn't going to be useful for students either, or maybe not aligned within your program of study. So that would be useful to check. And then, are your teacher certifications aligned with your programs of study? You don't want necessarily a teacher that doesn't have qualifications or strengths or certification. That isn't necessary to say that a teacher isn't qualified if they don't hold a certification, but do you have a way of proving that qualification, whether it's through like a district of innovation or an alternative certification process? But how do you justify that within the bounds of your local certification processes? So just checking on that. And then lastly, and again, sometimes this can be difficult or it takes time, are your local community stakeholders, do they agree with your offered programs of study and their industry-based certifications? So having that buy-in from your local community and also the stakeholders that are ultimately going to be the employers of your students. So building that trust, building those relationships, building that avenue of communication is really important ultimately for career and technical education and a successful program.
Great. Well, I know that's a lot for us all to think about, but just really great information. So I just want to open it up to anyone on the call. Please feel free to utilize the chat feature to ask any questions, and we can address those as they come in. We have about 5 minutes or so, so it's a good amount of time to kind of get in a few questions if there are any out there.
Awesome.
And while people are taking that time to get a question into the chat box, I do just want to highlight just some of the products that EAI offers. They can help with all areas of the process. And then I just want to put up a thank you and contact information if that is interesting to anybody out there. And so we'll wait just a few more minutes to see if there's any questions that we can address. I was looking forward to this interview, so I'm really glad we had an opportunity to talk CTE today. A lot of great information out there.
It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. 30 minutes talking about CTE, probably the best 30 minutes of my day.
This is definitely the best part of my day.